The metallic taste in his mouth made it hard to breathe. It wasn't blood, not yet, but the sharp, cold scent of fear that always rose when truth walked into a place where it wasn't welcome. The air inside the consulate felt stale, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Somewhere above, a fluorescent lamp flickered with the persistence of something dying slowly and making sure everyone noticed. The door clicked shut behind him. A sound too soft to be threatening, and yet the kind that made sweat crawl down a man's spine. Jamal felt it immediately, that subtle shift in atmosphere, like stepping onto a stage where someone had already written the final act but forgotten to tell the actor he wasn't meant to survive it. There was the faint hum of an air conditioner. The distant dripping of a pipe he couldn't see. The smell of printer ink, cheap cologne, and polished steel. Then footsteps. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Just decided. The kind of footsteps belonging to men who didn't improvise. "Welcome," someone said behind him, voice smooth, polite, and empty. The sort of voice that could wish you good morning while checking the time to see how long until your disappearance. Jamal turned, adjusting his glasses with fingers that trembled only slightly. He told himself it was nerves. Jet lag. Age. The thousand things that made a man shake, except the real reason, the one he tried not to name. He sensed something was wrong long before he entered this building. But truth makes people stubborn. Even when it kills them. He offered a cordial smile. "I just need the paperwork," he said. "It should take a few minutes." "Of course," the men replied. "Just a few minutes." The lie was delivered so gently it almost sounded like kindness. A metallic click echoed, a lock, or a latch, or maybe just the universe wincing at what it knew was coming. Jamal swallowed. The metallic taste deepened. His hands dampened. His heartbeat settled into a slow, heavy rhythm. The kind that came before storms. Or endings. He was led deeper inside. Hallway. Room. Closed blinds. Too many shadows for a sunny afternoon. The temperature dropped slightly, enough to make goosebumps rise along his arms. He steadied himself, inhaling the dry, recycled air. It smelled of tension. Of something rehearsed. A performance without an audience, except him. Then another sound. A faint shuffle somewhere behind the wall. A whisper. A vibration. A soft thud like someone adjusting equipment. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, to ask, but the words stuck. Not because he lacked courage. But because, deep down, he already knew the answer to every question he wanted to ask. Something was wrong. And he was alone. You might think truth protects the ones who carry it. You might believe that being right is some kind of shield. You'd be wrong. Terribly wrong. And today we tell the story of a man who vanished on the very day he came to speak the truth. Before the headlines, before the grainy security footage, before the world learned to pronounce his name with a mixture of shock and embarrassed hesitation, Jamal Khashoggi was simply a man made of ink. Ink on newspapers, ink in essays, ink on contracts he regretted signing and articles he never regretted publishing. He used to joke that if you cut him, he wouldn't bleed, he'd leak editorials. He was born into privilege, but he wore it loosely, like a suit that never quite fit. Growing up in Saudi Arabia during the era of golden projects and silent politics, Jamal learned early that truth was a dangerous hobby. A pastime for the brave, the foolish, or those who simply couldn't stop themselves. He was the third type. He spent his youth interviewing warriors, princes, ministers, exiles, spies, sometimes all before lunch. He drank too much coffee, laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't always funny, and filled every notebook he owned with scribbles that turned into stories. His colleagues remembered his walk, slow, thoughtful, almost apologetic. As if he was guilty of noticing too much. He smoked occasionally, though he hid it poorly, always smelling faintly of tobacco and mint gum. His glasses slid down his nose, perpetually on the verge of falling into his notes. He talked to everyone with the same calm curiosity, whether they were palace officials or janitors. It was infuriating for some, endearing for others, and fatal for him. Because Jamal had one flaw. He believed the truth made nations stronger. Unfortunately, nations sometimes disagreed. He navigated newsrooms like battlefields, careful, clever, unafraid to retreat, but always returning stronger. When he wrote, He chose his words like a surgeon choosing instruments, precise, sharp, and intended to heal, though occasionally leaving scars. And then came the exile. Not the romantic type with Parisian cafes and philosophical diaries. This was the modern kind: airports, paperwork, hotel rooms with flickering lights, the metallic taste of uncertainty. Washington became his reluctant home, a place where he rediscovered loneliness but also freedom, the real, terrifying kind, where you're allowed to say things that actually matter. He took long walks at night. He wrote until dawn. He laughed more quietly now, as if someone might be listening. And someone always was. He started publishing columns that made diplomats nervous and officials irritated. He warned about control, repression, illusions of reform, and he did it with the gentle tone of a man who wished things were different but refused to lie to comfort himself. His friends asked him, why push? Why provoke? He'd shrug, sip his oversweetened tea, and answer with weary humor. Someone has to be the optimist. Ironically, that optimism was the very thing that placed a target on his back. By the time he met Hattie, the woman he hoped to marry, he was tired of exile, tired of writing warnings no one wanted to hear, tired of carrying a truth that grew heavier with each passing year. She brought light back into his world, a sense of future, of possibility. And he dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, life would give him one last chance at peace. But paperwork has its own sense of humor. A dark one. And a man like Jamal, who spent his life telling the truth, now found himself walking toward the one building where lies had already written the script. He didn't know it yet. But his story was about to enter the chapter no journalist wants. The one that is written by other people. And as he packed his documents, ironed his shirt, and prepared for what should have been a simple visit to the consulate, he had no idea that fate, always a sarcastic playwright, had already dimmed the lights and called the actors to stage. He was still smiling then. He wouldn't be for long. Rain was falling in thin, needling lines, the kind that made the pavement shine like polished obsidian and turned every passing car into a slow-moving reflection of the city's unease. Istanbul never hid its emotions well. Whenever something important was about to happen, the clouds arrived early, like witnesses trying to get a good seat. Jamal stood outside the Saudi consulate, collar lifted, his glasses fogging slightly as he checked the time. 3 in the afternoon. Right on schedule. Bureaucracy, for once, seemed willing to cooperate. Hattie hovered a few steps behind him, her umbrella trembling slightly in her hands. She had that instinctive tension women develop when the man they love is about to walk somewhere they cannot follow. Jamal noticed. He always noticed. "I'll be quick," he told her, offering a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You said that last time," she replied. "Yes, but this time they're expecting me." A joke, but not a funny one. A security camera above the entrance blinked red. Another watched from across the street, perched like a crow on the edge of a building. Cameras don't blink unless someone wants to remember something. A consulate employee opened the glass door and gestured politely. Smooth expression. Neutral smile. The kind of welcome that says we already know your name. The courtyard smelled faintly of wet concrete and recently trimmed plants. A metal gate clanged shut behind him, a little louder than necessary, a little too decisive. Jamal pretended not to hear it, but his shoulders tightened anyway. Hattie refreshed her phone screen again and again, as if expecting a message before he even stepped inside. "You'll text me," she called out softly. "Of course," he answered. "As soon as I'm done." He meant it. And that was the tragedy. Inside, Jamal noticed the temperature drop, a subtle, calculated coldness. The receptionist smiled with all the enthusiasm of someone paid not to smile too much. She took his passport with unusually careful hands, as if touching evidence. "Please wait in the next room," she said. The hallway lights hummed. The floor gleamed. The walls were too spotless, too unmarked, like a place where nothing ever happened. Which was, of course, the point. He took a seat on a leather chair that felt slightly sticky, as if the room had been cleaned in a hurry. A small detail, insignificant to anyone else, but Jamal had spent decades noticing things people didn't want noticed. A faint vibration traveled through the floor. Machinery. An elevator. Something else. His phone buzzed. A message from Hattie. "I see your jacket through the window." I'll wait. He smiled despite the unease curling in his stomach. Outside, the rain thickened. A taxi splashed through a puddle. A stray cat darted under a bench, startled by something unseen. A few meters away, a white van idled. No markings. Tinted windows. Its engine kept running, steady and low, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the city. A man leaned inside it, talking on a phone. He had the kind of posture that screamed training, shoulders squared, movements precise, gaze always scanning. His coat was too expensive, his watch too plain. Professionals like to look ordinary, it's their only real camouflage. He glanced toward the consulate door once. Just once. And then turned away. Inside, Jamal adjusted his glasses, feeling the dryness in his throat as a door deeper within the building clicked open. A soft voice called him forward. He stood. And that was the moment, the exact second, when the universe could have offered him one last chance to walk away. It didn't. The door closed behind him with a dull, final sound. And he had no idea that in less than an hour, the world would be asking the question Istanbul was already whispering. How does a man walk into a building, and never come out? They landed before dawn, stepping off the private jet with the calm efficiency of people who never waited in immigration lines and never carried luggage heavier than a briefcase. Istanbul was still rubbing sleep from its eyes, unaware that 13 strangers had just arrived to rewrite a man's fate. From a distance, they looked like businessmen, tailored suits, polished shoes, identical black carry-ons. But up close, you'd notice the details that betrayed them, the square shoulders of men who trained their bodies like weapons, the quiet rhythm of synchronized footsteps, the clipped murmurs in a dialect that held commands more often than conversation. The first man, tall, severe, with a salt and pepper beard, walked as if measuring every floor tile. His name wouldn't appear on any official report, but airport staff remembered one thing: he didn't smile. Not once. Not the polite kind, not the nervous kind. His face was pure geometry and purpose. The second man chewed mint gum with military discipline, popping a piece every exact 2 hours. He wore gloves in warm weather, a habit that was either hygienic or professional. The third man had a laugh that sounded rehearsed, like someone practicing humanity in front of a mirror. There were others, too many to describe without risking the mood turning into a roster. Let's just say no one arrived in this city by accident. Certainly not all on the same flight, certainly not checking into the same hotel, certainly not booking rooms under names that dissolved into air the moment you tried to verify them. They checked in at a luxury hotel overlooking the Bosphorus, a place where the staff was trained to remember nothing and forget everything. The concierge later recalled that one of the men tipped generously, but counted the bills twice before handing them over. Professionals are generous only when the script calls for it. Less than an hour after their arrival, surveillance footage placed them near the consulate. They didn't linger. They didn't look around. They moved like a team that had been shown the blueprint of the day. Inside their hotel suite, bags were opened. Not the kind filled with shirts and socks. The other kind. One man inspected a metallic case with the reverence of someone preparing medical equipment. The irony hung in the air like cigarette smoke, because their mission wasn't healing. It was containment. A surgical strike in the heart of a diplomatic maze. Remember, one of them said, slipping a phone into his pocket, it's supposed to be quiet. Quiet. Such a polite word for such an impolite task. Another replied with a smirk, as quiet as bureaucracy. Dark humor travels well, even across borders. They reviewed the plan in low voices, each word falling like a domino toward the inevitable. Timing. Entrances. Exits. Positions in the building. A rehearsed choreography where every step had been plotted with the precision of a watchmaker. The irony, of course, was that not one of them seemed to consider the possibility that something might go wrong. When a team is too certain of its success, the universe tends to raise an eyebrow. But fate would wait a little longer. For now, everything was proceeding exactly as written. At midday, they left the hotel in staggered groups. 2 took a taxi. 3 walked. 4 rode in the van that wouldn't turn off its engine for hours. They converged toward the consulate from different directions, like pieces of a puzzle slowly locking into place. A cat watched one of them pass and hissed. Animals always recognize danger before people do. The men didn't even spare it a glance. Inside the consulate, a few staff members felt something shift in the air. A heaviness. A script being set. One receptionist, later anonymous and shaken, whispered. They moved like they owned the place. In their own way, they did. In a room upstairs, chairs were adjusted. Phones silenced. Windows shut. Shadows lengthened even though the sun was bright. They were ready long before Jamal even arrived at the door. He still believed he was there to sign papers. They knew he was there to be erased. And outside, the rain began to fall harder, as if the sky itself understood what kind of day this would become. The room they led him into was too clean. Not the usual tidy of diplomatic offices, but the sterile, deliberate cleanliness of places where people don't want questions asked later. The blinds were half closed, slicing the daylight into pale bars that trembled across the floor like nervous breath. Jamal sat where they told him to sit. A leather chair. Cold. Rigid. It felt less like furniture and more like a verdict. He tried to focus on the purpose of his visit, the marriage documents, the approval he needed, the normalcy of it all, but the air had changed. It was as if someone had lowered the oxygen by just enough to make his lungs complain. A man entered. The polite one from before. You understand the procedure, he asked. Of course, Jamal replied, offering a tired smile. I've done this before. The man nodded, but there was something off in the way he did it, a fraction of a pause, a flicker in the eyes. Like a doctor nodding to a patient who doesn't know the diagnosis yet. A second man stepped inside. Then a third. Their shoes made no sound on the polished floor. Jamal shifted. Is something wrong with my paperwork? No, said the first man. Everything is in order. If lies had a temperature, this one was below freezing. A faint buzzing came from the hallway, a phone set to silent, vibrating insistently. Someone whispered. A chair scraped softly. Footsteps moved in a pattern too synchronized to be improvised. Jamal adjusted his glasses. His hand trembled, not a lot, just enough to betray a creeping realization, something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The polite man stepped closer, lowering his voice. There's a matter we must discuss. What kind of matter? Jamal asked. He tried to keep his tone steady, professional. He'd interviewed warlords and politicians who thought they were gods, he knew how to mask fear. But fear has a smell, and it had begun to seep through the room like invisible smoke. The men didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed the door with a soft, final click. That sound, that tiny, unremarkable sound, was the moment Jamal's heartbeat began to change. A slow, heavy drum. A silent alarm. Outside, in the courtyard, Hadis's messages went unseen. Are you okay? Still waiting. Don't forget we have dinner tonight. Inside, one of the men adjusted something behind the desk, a device. A recorder. Something metallic glinted for half a second before being covered again. Too fast for certainty. Too deliberate to be innocent. Jamal cleared his throat. Gentlemen, I really don't have much time. My fiancée is waiting. A brief silence answered him. Then, footsteps in the corridor. More than one person. More than two. A shuffle, a thud, the soft friction of rubber soles stopping just outside the door. Time slowed. Not metaphorically, really slowed, stretching like melting wax. A man entered. Larger than the others. Confident in a way that made the air contract around him. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He simply looked at Jamal as though reading an obituary that hadn't been printed yet. Something in Jamal's chest twisted. Panic. Instinct. The final, primitive recognition that he was no longer in a consulate, he was in a trap. He stood up, voice shaking despite his attempt at calm. If there's an issue, I would prefer to resolve it in writing. Please return my passport. No one moved. He tried again. Gentlemen. But the large man raised a hand. Not a fist. Not a weapon. Just a small, casual gesture, as if signaling the beginning of a routine task. That was somehow worse. Jamal stepped back. The chair behind him scraped the floor. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out the hum of the air conditioner. He didn't know exactly what would happen next. But he understood one thing with devastating clarity. He would not be walking out through the door he had just entered. And outside, under the Istanbul rain, Hadisi checked her phone again, unaware that the man she loved was already slipping into a silence orchestrated long before he arrived. Hadisi paced. Not dramatically, not the way people do in movies, with hands in their hair and frantic gasps, but in small, tight steps. The kind a person makes when they're trying not to think the worst, and failing. The rain had softened into a fine mist, settling on her coat and turning the ends of her hair damp. She wiped her glasses with a trembling hand, smearing them more than cleaning them. Her umbrella lay useless on the bench beside her, opened at first, then abandoned when she realized standing still made her imagination louder. Every few seconds she looked toward the consulate door. Then down at her phone. Then back at the door. No message. No update. Just silence, thick enough to feel like a weight on her chest. In front of her, traffic crawled along the street. Pedestrians hurried under hoods, muttering about the weather. A stray dog shook itself under an awning, glanced at her with bored sympathy, then trotted away. She envied it. At least the dog could walk off its worry. Her phone buzzed. A spark of relief shot through her. Only for the screen to show spam. A store discount. A notification she didn't ask for. The kind of message that felt offensive when your world was quietly collapsing. She checked the time again. 3:20. 3:30. 3:40. A simple appointment shouldn't take this long. Paperwork didn't need an hour. Not in any normal reality. But this wasn't a normal day, and Hadisi felt it creeping in her bones. A consulate guard passed by her once. Then again. His eyes slid over her and away, quick and indifferent. On his second round, she forced herself to ask. "Excuse me, do you know how long the process takes?" He offered a shrug that had the emotional density of a brick. "Depends." On what? Paperwork. That was the end of the conversation. He moved on without another glance. Hadisi folded her arms, pressing her hands against her sides to stop them from shaking. She whispered to herself, the way people do when they're trying to stay calm. He said it would be quick. He said he'd text me. A young couple passed by, laughing. Their happiness felt surreal. Out of place. Hadisi watched them disappear down the wet street, bit the inside of her cheek, and forced her gaze back to the consulate window where she'd seen Jamal's jacket earlier. Now the window reflected nothing but rain streaks and fluorescent light. A minute passed. Another. Another. Then she noticed something odd. A black van that had been parked across the street earlier was gone. In its place now, a different car. Same spot. Same engine idling. Someone inside, watching the building. Hadisi wasn't the paranoid type. She didn't live in shadows or conspiracies. She was a scholar, grounded in research and logic. But instinct speaks a language older than reason, and right now hers was screaming. She typed another message. "Is everything okay? Need anything?" No response. She hesitated, then added. "Should I come inside?" She waited. And waited. No dots. No typing indicator. Nothing. She looked at the consulate door again. It remained closed, heavy, indifferent. A sealed mouth. The kind of door that never opened for good news. A wind gust swept through the courtyard, carrying a faint metallic scent from somewhere behind the walls. She shivered. Tugged her coat tighter. Tried to draw warmth from the thin air. Minutes stretched into an hour. Long enough for hope to grow tired. Long enough for dread to pull up a chair. And then, finally, she spoke the words she had been avoiding, whispered under her breath like a confession. He should have been out by now. And she was right. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that inside the building, decisions were already being made that would never allow him to come back out. Not in any form she could recognize. If walls could talk, these ones would whisper. Not scream, screaming implies panic. No, these walls were familiar with secrets. They held them the way old bankers hold money, quietly, methodically, without a single leak. Inside the consulate, the atmosphere had changed. Not suddenly, atmospheres rarely shift all at once, but gradually, like a curtain being drawn over a window. The polite man was gone now, replaced by others whose politeness had limits. Jamal remained standing, back inches from the cold wall, trying to steady his breath. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, drowning out the distant hum of the city beyond those sealed windows. He opened his mouth to speak. A question, perhaps a protest. But the largest man stepped forward, lifting a hand as though conducting an orchestra only he could hear. And just like that, the room filled. Not with noise. Not with shouting. But with presence. Boots. Breath. Fabric brushing fabric. The subtle rustle of men trained to move efficiently, silently, inevitably. A man with square glasses approached him, holding what looked like a document folder. For a split second, Jamal's hope flickered. Paperwork. It's just paperwork. Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. But the folder stayed closed. The man's voice was calm, almost bored. "We need you to return to Riyadh," he said, as if offering a vacation package. "It will be easier for everyone." Jamal exhaled. Slow. Firm. "No," he replied. "I'm not going back." The square glasses man tilted his head. "Things don't work the way you think." Jamal straightened his posture, though his knees trembled. Then perhaps they should. For a brief moment, something like respect flickered in the man's eyes. Not admiration, respect. The kind predators feel for prey that refuses to run. Another voice cut through the room. "Let's proceed." Two simple words. Delivered without emotion. Without malice. Without hesitation. Jamal's stomach clenched. A cold wave washed through him, chilling his fingers. His glasses slid down his nose, and he pushed them back up with a hand that suddenly felt detached from his body. He stepped back. Straightened again. "This is a consulate," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Not a prison." "Today," one of the men replied dryly, "it's both." A dark joke. Delivered with the timing of someone who'd practiced. The room tightened around him. Footsteps. Shadows shifting. A sense of choreography reaching its final movement. Jamal glanced toward the wall, as if expecting a door to appear, a miracle, a reprieve. But the walls offered nothing. They simply absorbed everything, the way they were built to. A tension coil tightened in the air. A silence that felt preloaded. A moment before a moment. The large man stepped closer. "Please," Jamal said softly, voice cracking not from fear but from the unbearable weight of understanding. "My fiancée is waiting outside." No one answered. No one needed to. Somewhere in the consulate, a phone vibrated again. A rhythmic buzz. Ignored. Upstairs, a man in another room checked his watch, bored, impatient, wondering when the others would finish. In the corridor, another shifted his stance, leaning against the wall, tapping his foot as though waiting for a meeting to end. The mundanity of it all was the cruelest part. History being written in tones of routine. A life becoming a task on someone's checklist. Jamal swallowed. His throat felt tight. He whispered the same word again, not to them, but to himself. "Please." A hand gripped his shoulder. Firm. Controlled. No anger. No rush. Just a gesture of inevitability. The door clicked softly as it closed the last sliver of light from the hallway. And the walls, faithful, silent, loyal walls, listened. They would never repeat what they heard. They would never reveal the truth. But they felt it. Every word. Every movement. Every last moment of a man whose only crime was refusing to lie. Outside, Hadisi shivered under the gray Istanbul sky, checking her phone again. Inside, time continued its slow collapse. The city outside moved on as if nothing had happened. Istanbul's streets were damp and gleaming from the rain, taxis splashing puddles, pedestrians huddling under umbrellas, the Bosphorus shimmering under a gray, indifferent sky. But inside the consulate, time had become a different currency. A man had vanished, and the world hadn't noticed yet. Meanwhile, across the city, the team's hotel room hummed with preparation. It looked ordinary at first glance: beige walls, twin beds, a mini fridge with overpriced water bottles, a soft carpet underfoot. But the suitcase in the corner told a different story. It was heavy. Locked. Lined with compartments for instruments that should never have existed in a hotel room. Silver, sharp, metallic. Tools of a trade too calculated to be imagined by ordinary minds. The kind that makes you notice the air differently, heavier, expectant. One man inspected the suitcase. He ran a gloved hand over the clasps, listening to the faint click of each hinge. Another man checked the contents like a jeweler appraising diamonds, precise and detached. There was a rhythm to it, a choreography that resembled a rehearsal for something no one wanted to witness. A phone buzzed. Messages in code. Names. Times. Confirmation. The world outside was silent. The men inside were everything. They moved with efficiency. No wasted gestures, no unnecessary words. Yet beneath the discipline, a dark humor lingered, subtle and sardonic. One whispered, "I wonder if anyone outside will notice when he disappears." Another answered dryly, "Not today. Maybe tomorrow. Or maybe never." They laughed quietly. Not with joy. Not with malice. With the kind of humor born of inevitability. Back at the consulate, the walls had absorbed every sound, every hesitation, every breath of Jamal's, and now, like a tide, the execution of the plan moved silently across the city to meet him. A suitcase, a room, tools, and men trained to operate without conscience. Everything was ready. Everything had been rehearsed. But the irony, cruel, bitter irony, was that all of this meticulous preparation could never account for the life inside the room, a man of ink and words, stubborn and alert, still breathing, still human. For a few moments, the men paused, as if considering the absurdity of their craft. A journalist. Alone. Facing them in the sterile light of a consulate room. And then, one by one, they put gloves on, zipped the suitcase, and walked toward inevitability. Outside, Hattie glanced at the rain, her phone still silent. The city felt endless and indifferent, unaware that in one building, a life was about to be erased from it forever. Somewhere, someone would notice later. But for now, the hotel room, the suitcase, and the men were alone in their dark symphony. The news didn't break immediately. It trickled first through whispers in Istanbul cafes, faint mentions in encrypted messages, a few nervous headlines that didn't dare name names. Then it hit the global wires: Jamal Khashoggi had entered a consulate, and never emerged. Governments responded with caution. Carefully worded statements. Diplomatic language heavy with concern, light on accusation. Leaders spoke of investigation, cooperation, facts being gathered. Contracts would continue. Oil would flow. Trade agreements would remain untouched. Irony dripped from every sentence. A man's disappearance became a chess piece, a token in a game where morality was negotiable and the cost of speaking the truth was invisible to the powerful, until it wasn't. Journalists around the world lit up their feeds. They shared every fragment: CCTV clips, witness reports, timelines constructed from phone pings. Analysts offered theory after theory, some plausible, some absurd. But the undercurrent was unmistakable: someone, somewhere, had orchestrated this with precision, and the world's polite outrage was simply polite. News anchors read statements with solemn faces. "We are deeply concerned. We demand answers. Transparency is essential." Meanwhile, in private rooms, diplomats sighed and made quiet calls. Some contracts were paused, others pressed forward. The balance between outrage and profit was delicate, and it was being handled delicately, like glassware at a state dinner. Social media erupted. Hashtags trended. Candlelight vigils appeared in cities far from Istanbul. People demanded accountability, justice, truth. But as the outrage spread, so did the caution. Governments were outraged, carefully. Corporations were horrified, carefully. Even the press was constrained by libel laws, by access, by influence. Hattie received calls from friends and family, all worried. None had answers. And she had none herself. She waited, as anyone would, for the men she loved to return. Yet inside, she felt it, the creeping, almost imperceptible understanding that the machinery of power was indifferent to the truth of one life. Somewhere in Riyadh, officials discussed timelines and damage control. There were whispers about how the story might be spun. The term regrettable incident floated like a balloon in the conference room, polished and empty. Irony again, a disappearance orchestrated meticulously, now measured and negotiated by bureaucrats and traders who wouldn't risk a dime or a deal to acknowledge reality. And still, the world watched. Politely outraged. Carefully shocked. Strategically horrified. Meanwhile, journalists pieced together the story from fragments: the men in the consulate, the suitcase, the hotel rooms, the van across the street. Each clue revealed a level of planning and cold calculation that made ordinary crime seem amateurish. A dark truth emerged: when power wants a secret, it can suspend morality, logic, and even law. And when the secret involves a man like Jamal, whose only crime was to speak, the world's politeness is all the protection anyone has. Hadis's phone buzzed again. She stared at it. Another news alert. Another headline. Journalist missing after visiting Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Her hands trembled. She put the phone down. Rain streaked her glasses. She exhaled slowly, realizing what she had been avoiding. Sometimes the truth doesn't need confirmation. It just disappears. And the world reacts, very carefully. The consulate remained silent. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant, ink, and something metallic that no one would ever admit noticing. Jamal Khashoggi had entered willingly, carrying papers and hope, and now the room held only echoes of the men who would never leave it. Outside, the world debated, analyzed, and speculated. Governments offered statements, journalists pieced together timelines. But inside those walls, nothing could tell the full story. There was no body, no confession, no direct evidence that could withstand scrutiny. Only shadows, actions, and intention. The men responsible moved with the precision of surgeons, cleaning, arranging, erasing. Every step premeditated. Every gesture rehearsed. Every trace left behind designed to mislead. The irony was cruel: a life erased, and yet its erasure became a puzzle for the world, a puzzle the orchestrators could watch unfold with calm detachment. Forensic teams would later identify inconsistencies. CCTV footage suggested presence. Communications revealed flights, hotel bookings, names. But these fragments were just smoke. The body, the physical proof, had vanished, leaving only theory and fear. In hotel rooms, in vehicles, in offices across continents, the meticulous planning of 13 men unfolded in reverse as investigators traced them. Each discovery seemed too perfect, too clinical. Even mistakes became carefully controlled narratives. Meanwhile, Hadisi waited, incapable of entering the building, powerless to stop the invisible machine that had swallowed her fiancé. Each hour was heavier than the last, each notification on her phone a reminder of absence, of silence, of uncertainty. Some journalists pieced together the story from interviews, leaks, and whispers. They reconstructed the crime with painstaking detail: the arrival, the instruments, the hotel room, the coordinated movements. They traced Jamal's last steps into the consulate, the interactions, the gestures that hinted at struggle, at resistance, at understanding. Yet the reconstruction could never be complete. Because without the body, without the finality of tangible loss, the crime existed in a liminal space, half fact, half theory, half myth. A political analyst summarized the world's collective frustration with a single line: "It's the perfect crime, not because it was flawless, but because it leaves nothing for closure, only questions." The paradox was cruel. A man whose words had once illuminated injustice now existed in history as absence. The world had all the pieces but could not assemble them fully. And every time someone spoke of him, it was with a tentative language, carefully hedged, never certain, always polite. Jamal's life became an outline traced in shadows, a ghost story for adults, a cautionary tale for journalists, a silent rebuke to the complacent. And in Istanbul, rain continued to fall. Wet streets reflected neon signs, and the city moved on, unconcerned. The consulate's doors remained closed. The rooms inside were quiet, and in that silence, the world understood something terrible. A crime without a body leaves not only grief, but a space where truth cannot fully exist. And in that space, power thrives. The world reacted, but never fully. Outrage was expressed in press releases, statements, and hashtags, but always within visible limits. Some nations demanded investigations, others expressed concern, and some chose silence, calculating which side would benefit most. Business continued, oil flowed, contracts were signed, everything proceeded as if a man's disappearance could coexist with commerce, as if morality were negotiable. In Istanbul, Hadisi waited. She no longer counted minutes, only weighed the silence. Every phone buzz, every news alert, was a cruel reminder that truth could be postponed, delayed, or denied. And deep down, she understood something terrifying: the machinery of power could erase a life, but it could not erase the world's awareness, only its urgency. Investigators pieced together fragments. Flight logs. Hotel check-ins. Conversations overheard. CCTV footage. Names, faces, timelines. Each clue traced a shadowed path from Istanbul to Riyadh. But every piece was just that, a piece. No finality. No justice. No closure. In Riyadh, the operation's architects measured the fallout. Their calculations had accounted for politics, for international relations, for PR spins. But even the most meticulous plans could not fully contain the global narrative. They watched news cycles, diplomatic cables, and social media, learning that truth, once seen, refuses to be unseen. Within the corridors of power, some faced consequences. Not legal ones. Not moral ones. Just carefully orchestrated inconveniences, resignations presented as voluntary, adjustments framed as reforms. The system corrected itself, silently, efficiently, without apology. For those involved in the operation, life continued. Some returned to familiar routines. Some lingered in shadows, haunted not by the act, but by the certainty of what they had witnessed. The irony was cruel: their meticulous planning ensured the world would never see them in the act, yet they could never forget it. For journalists, investigators, and Hadisi, the price was different. Questions were endless, but answers were scarce. Every revelation only deepened the labyrinth of uncertainty. Every official statement, carefully phrased, reinforced the absence of real accountability. The world watched, carefully, politely, strategically. And the man who had spoken truth into power was gone, leaving only an absence filled with reflection, grief, and the unbearable weight of unanswered questions. In the quiet, one thought lingered above all others. Truth, when inconvenient, becomes negotiable. And the price is paid by those who carry it. Hadisi finally left the consulate courtyard, her umbrella dripping, her hands cold. The streets of Istanbul continued around her, indifferent. Life went on. But for her, and for anyone who had known Jamal, nothing would ever feel the same. And somewhere, far from her, in offices polished and secure, men reviewed their actions with detached efficiency. The machinery of consequence had not touched them, yet the shadow of what they had done would never leave. The aftermath was complete. Not justice. Not truth. Only the heavy, lingering silence of what the world refused to fully acknowledge. Sometimes, truth doesn't vanish quietly. Sometimes, it leaves fingerprints on walls, echoes in empty rooms, and a metallic taste in the mouth that never fades. Jamal Khashoggi had walked into the consulate with documents in hand, a heart full of hope, and words he believed could matter. He never walked out. His absence became a question mark etched across nations, whispered in newsrooms, debated in diplomatic offices, felt in the gut of everyone who understood that some things are more powerful than fear, and yet, some forces are stronger than both. The world reacted carefully, politely. Investigations were promised, facts were requested, condemnation was uttered. But life, commerce, and convenience carried on, indifferent. Truth had entered a building and vanished. Power had shrugged, rearranged itself, and smiled quietly behind closed doors. Hadisi remembered him in fragments: his soft laugh, the way he held a pen as if negotiating with the universe, his stubborn belief that honesty mattered more than safety. She replayed moments that now felt unbearably ordinary: shared meals, whispered jokes, the promise of a future together. And she realized that absence can carry as much weight as presence. That silence can be louder than any statement. That waiting, watching, hoping, these are burdens no one prepares for. Elsewhere, men who had executed the plan returned to their routines. Offices, hotels, flights, meetings, life moved around them. Some felt nothing. Some felt the faint chill of conscience that no one else would notice. They had done what needed to be done, or what someone above them demanded. History would note their names only in fragments, if at all. And the truth? It lingered in the gaps. Between headlines. Between diplomatic statements. Between the polite outrage and the deals that never paused. It existed in whispers, in quiet reflections, in the shadow of every journalist who dared to ask questions. Sometimes, truth disappears in plain sight. Sometimes, it is negotiated, erased, or ignored. But it always leaves its mark. For Jamal, the mark was the world's conscience, uncomfortable, uneven, incomplete. A reminder that speaking the truth can cost everything, and that the machinery of power often prefers silence over accountability. And for those who loved him, the mark was absence. A vacancy in the world that could not be filled, only remembered. Because in the end, the lesson was clear. Sometimes truth disappears along with those who knew it. And the world, polite and precise, continues as if nothing happened. The rain still fell in Istanbul. Streets glistened. Life carried on. But in that quiet, a shadow remained, the echo of a man who believed that words could matter, even when the world refused to listen. And in that echo, the truth lives, fragile and defiant, where only memory can honor it.